What's up, heathens? How ya doing? Today we're going to discuss why Mara Bar Serapion is bad evidence for a historical Christ. We're going to talk about exactly what Serapion said, when he said it, and if he was possibly influenced by Christian sources or if he truly is an independent account of Jesus. If you're interested in this, then please stay tuned. Mara Bar Serapion was a Stoic philosopher from Syria while it was under Roman control. A letter that he wrote is often used by historical apologists as evidence that Jesus existed. In his letter, he is talking to his son about three figures who were unjustly treated: Socrates, Pythagoras, and a king of the Jews. And they were all killed. So let's take a look at exactly what Mara Bar Serapion wrote. What advantage did the Athenians gain from putting Socrates to death? Famine and plague came upon them as a judgment for their crime. What advantage did the men of Samos gain from burning Pythagoras? In a moment their land was covered with sand. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? It was just after that their kingdom was abolished. God justly avenged these three wise men. The Athenians died of hunger. The Samians were overwhelmed by the sea. The Jews, ruined and driven from their land, live in complete dispersion. But Socrates did not die for good. He lived on in the teaching of Plato. Pythagoras did not die for good. He lived on in the statue of Hera. Nor did the wise king die for good. He lived on in the teaching which he had given. Now, scholars can't exactly date this particular writing by Mara Bar Serapion. The best that we can do is give you a date range. And most agree that it was written between 73 AD and the early 3rd century. But most likely it was written in the 2nd century because of some of the issues that he described about the Romans. And that really fit with the situation at the time in the 2nd century. I'd like to start by pointing out how even at its most conservative earliest date, it was written 40 years after Jesus supposedly died on the cross or walked on this earth or whatnot. And based on some other scholars' determination, it could have been written nearly 200 years after Jesus supposedly walked on the earth. Also, the Gospel of Mark was written near the end of the 1st century, and so most likely it was written way before Serapion wrote his letter. This is an important fact to keep in mind, because what that means is that Serapion could have been influenced by existing theology. And there are a few other reasons to suggest that Serapion was influenced by existing Jewish Christian theology. First, he links the destruction of the Jewish temple to the death of this wise king. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus' death is symbolically linked to the establishment of a new covenant, and his death brings destruction to the old covenant, or the temple. One common interpretation of Mark's story about the destruction of the temple is that God was punishing the Jews for rejecting Jesus. This interpretation is supported by the Synoptic Gospels. Another link we have to Jewish Christian or Jesus-based theology is that Serapion blames the Jews for executing Jesus and not the Romans. In the theology, the Jewish Sanhedrin were the ones that were pushing for Jesus' death, not the Romans. By blaming the Jews, Serapion shows that he has at least some knowledge of the Jewish Christian theology that was circulating at the time. And the blaming of the Sanhedrin can only come from an understanding of the existing theology, because it's not found in any other non-Christian sources. It would be really hard to explain these connections without some kind of influence from the Christians. Since he was clearly informed by Jewish Christians about their theology, he is not an independent source. Based on these factors, I believe that Mara Bar Serapion was just regurgitating what Christians were already claiming about their faith. This would be why he thinks the Jews are to blame for this wise king's death. The time between when Jesus supposedly was living and when Serapion wrote his letter aligns with the Christian theology. This indicates that Serapion could have easily been influenced by early Jewish Christian theology. At the very least, the Gospel of Mark would have been written by the time Serapion was writing. Matthew is also likely to have been written and in circulation at the time. He could have also drawn influence from Paul's writings, considering he was writing in the 50s. And depending on when the letter was actually written, he could have had access to most of the New Testament. The fact that Mara Bar Serapion referenced Jesus as this wise king further strengthens this link we have to the Synoptic Gospels. And it supports this idea that he was influenced by Christian theology. He just simply isn't an independent source. So historicist arguments that claim that Mara Bar Serapion is an independent and direct reference to a Jesus are seriously flawed. And they violate all three of our criteria that we are using to determine what is good evidence for a historical Jesus. That would be time, independence, and explanatory power. Serapion also gets other historical citations incorrect, like Pythagoras being killed by his countrymen. In fact, there are conflicting stories about Pythagoras' death. In one account, he fled to Metapontum and starved himself to death. In another, he was killed by an angry mob in a conflict, which neither side was his countrymen. Either way, Serapion's account is just wrong. Mara Bar Serapion is yet another supposed historical account of Jesus that merely repeats commonly held beliefs of the Jewish Christians at the time, and thus does not prove that Jesus existed. Thank you, heathens, for tuning in today. I really appreciate you guys. I'm planning on doing a lot more of these short little informative videos about specific bits of evidence for a historical Jesus, and kind of further explain why I am a mythicist and why the current evidence just does not actually hold up to scrutiny. So, I hope that you will continue with me on this journey, and I appreciate you guys being here. If you did like this video, go down below and leave me a comment and let me know. If you disagreed, also leave your comments down there and let me know why you disagree about my assessment here. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of mythicist content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice, and I will see you heathens later.